Hi, everybody. So in this video, I am going to go over the PowerPoint on compare contrast writing that goes along with chapter 12 of the book. So it's such an important PowerPoint and lesson to go through because this is, believe it or not, this is actually the paragraph that students struggle with more as a whole. And it's interesting because most students don't really know what an evaluation paragraph is when they get to week 5. So they really have to use that lesson to help learn about that type of writing so that they can, write their paragraph properly. Then we get to week 6 and it's compare contrast, and everybody was like, oh, I know exactly what compare contrast is. This is going to be easy. No worries, takes a lot of pressure off, and you're like, oh, okay, I feel a lot more confident going into this. And they will skip the lesson. And then they do very poorly the first time around on their compare contrast paragraph, because while we all understand the idea of compare contrast, and it's not a new idea at all, not everyone truly understands or has been taught how to properly write a compare contrast piece. So please pay attention to everything that's in this PowerPoint. It's really tailored to what I have noticed students struggle with the most. Okay, let's go ahead and bring it up and get started. All right, so compare contrast. Two very common everyday thought processes. Literally, we probably engage in some sort of compare contrast thinking almost daily. Sometimes it's not necessarily always deep thought or thought that takes up a lot of time, but I would imagine that it's a pretty common occurrence for nearly all of us to in some way engage in compare contrast every day. When we compare two things, we are showing how they are similar. When we contrast two things, we're showing how they are different, right? We can compare brand name products like Nike versus New Balance shoes. We can compare or contrast to television shows or to movies. We can compare or contrast a book and its movie version. We could compare or contrast two instructors or two bosses, two jobs, two friends. We can even compare or contrast like two courses of action to take, right? Like, almost like the pros and the cons in a way. That involves a bit of compare and contrast, looking at how things are similar or different, right? The purpose of doing compare or contrast is to really just gain a better understanding of those two things, to understand them more clearly. Sometimes we use the compare contrast to make judgments, right? We're looking at how these two things are different and deciding which one is better based on those differences. That is something that compare and contrast can lend itself to. There is always some underlying purpose, though, to why we are engaging in comparing two things or contrasting two things, right? But ultimately, it's because we want a better understanding of them for whatever reason, right? So when you are in school, you oftentimes can be asked to engage in compare contrast on different assignments, not necessarily essays, but could be. But you don't always know right away that it's asking you to compare or contrast. So like some sample questions here, contrast the apple characteristics which determine if the apple is a gala apple or a honey apple. Or what characteristics distinguish the right lung from the left lung? What are the differences between Eastern and Western medicine, and which do you think is most effective in treating patients with multiple sclerosis? So those questions don't necessarily come right out and say, you're going to be doing a compare contrast here, right? But the questions themselves indicate that that's what you'll be doing. However, they all have an underlying purpose, right? So, maybe these two things, we think they're really similar, but actually they're really different. Or it could be the opposite. It could be that these two things, we tend to assume that they're really different, but it turns out they actually have a lot in common. There are a lot of similarities. Or these two things are different and we want to determine which option is best, right? Based on those differences. We're going to kind of be focusing on those first two purposes, how two things that are thought to be similar are actually quite different, or how two things that are thought to be different are actually quite similar, right? All right. So, again, what you do not want to do is fall into the trap of thinking that when you are asked to write a compare contrast paragraph or a compare contrast essay, that you are supposed to talk about the similarities and the differences. It's not compare and contrast. It's compare / contrast. So you're going to be doing one or the other, not both. And if you go back to this slide here, these sample questions that could come up in an assignment or in a discussion, it's clear here in these sample questions that we are engaging in compare contrast, but we're not doing both at the same time. When we're talking about those two apples, we know we're supposed to be focusing on how they're different, because it's those differences that determine if it's a gala apple or a Honeycrisp apple. We're not going to then answer that question and talk about all the things that they have in common. No, we're going to focus on the differences, because the differences is what distinguishes them, right? You're not going to do comparing and contrasting in the paragraph. You are going to decide, when you have your two topics picked out, your two subjects, do you want to focus on how they are similar, or do you want to focus on how they are different? And one way that you can help make your paragraph have a good angle, remember the rhetorical situation, topic, angle, purpose, audience, tone. Remember, your angle is, what you're bringing to the table that's a little different, a little new, a little unique. If you can come up with, subject A and subject B are thought to be different, but they're actually quite similar, you are bringing something new to the table, because everyone assumes these two things are so different, and you're going to show us how they're actually quite similar. Or it could go the opposite way, right? Everybody assumes that subject A and subject B are so much alike, and you're going to bring something new to this and say, actually, they're pretty different, right? So thinking of it like that can help you figure out maybe what two subjects you want to compare or contrast, but then it can help you figure out what your underlying purpose is. Do you want to show how people think they're different, but they're actually quite similar? Or do you want to show how people think they're similar, but they're actually quite different? So if you're going about it in that way, you will then have a better shot at making sure you've adhered to this requirement, which is, for your compare contrast paragraph, you will choose just one of these two purposes. You will focus on just the similarities or just the differences. Okay. Students falter here sometimes. I do get some students every once in a while who give me a compare contrast paragraph and they have tried to do both. The first section will be how their two subjects are similar, and then the second section of the paragraph will be how their two subjects are different. And then, they pretty much receive a failing grade, and then they have to redo it and decide, do they want to focus on just the similarities or just the differences? I mean, it's not the end of the world because you do get a chance to revise. But again, if you can go into writing this paragraph already understanding that you need to focus on just one or the other, similarities or differences, then that's one less thing you have to worry about sort of missing the mark on with your paragraph, right? So once you have determined your two subjects and you have decided whether you're going to focus on the similarities or their differences, one of the next things you need to do, your next step could be coming up with your supporting ideas. And if you take that step next, that's fine. But sort of the big piece that comes next is how you want to organize your compare contrast of subject A and subject B, because you have two options with this type of paragraph or essay, right? So we have two methods of development that you can use. The first over here is the one side at a time approach. You might also hear it referred to as the block approach. And this is where, you have your topic sentence of your paragraph, right? And that topic sentence will somehow let us know which two subjects and whether or not you're going to be comparing them or contrasting them. And then the body of your paragraph then actually does the comparing or the contrasting. And the way it does that is you start off with subject A. And you say everything that you want to say about subject A. So, and there should be like distinct main ideas for subject A. So your first point about subject A, your second point about subject A, your third point about subject A, and then you switch and talk about subject B. And whatever you talked about in point one for subject A, you're going to talk about that same thing for point one in subject B. The point one, point two, and point three are the exact same in both sections, right? We're going to look very closely at this. So if this isn't quite, if it's not quite clicking yet, don't worry, we're going to be looking at a lot of these. All right, but the whole idea here is simply first to understand that if you're using one side at a time, then you are talking about your first subject in its entirety, and then your second subject in its entirety, and then your concluding sentence. Your other option is the point-by-point method of development. So you still have your topic sentence where you're going to introduce the two subjects and whether or not you're going to be comparing them or contrasting them, all right? And then the body of the paragraph then actually does the comparing or the contrasting, except this time, you're going to organize the body of the paragraph by the main points. So you've got point one. This is the first similarity or the first difference. And you're going to talk about that first similarity in terms of subject A, and then in terms of subject B. And then you're going to move on to their next similarity or difference. Talk about how it applies to subject A and how it applies to subject B. And then you're going to move on to your third similarity or difference, how it applies to subject A and how it applies to subject B, and then your concluding sentence. So basically you can see over here in the one side at a time approach, it's your two subjects that drive the organization. Over here in point by point, it's your main points, your main ideas that drive the organization. I tend to think, for reasons that we will get into, that point by point is a little easier to manage. But it honestly just depends on the two subjects that you have and what just feels right. Does it feel right to talk all about one first and then the other? Or does it feel more, does it need to be a little more logical where you're going by the main ideas, the differences or the similarities? And again, we're going to take a look at several examples of both methods of development. All right, so hopefully you'll get a feel for both methods, and that will help you sort of determine which one do you understand the best, which one will you be able to execute the best, which one fits your subjects the best. Okay, all right, so here is sort of a a different sort of visual that has some specifics with it, you know, because here on the other side, it was just subject A, point 1, point 2, point 3. There was nothing specific for us to sort of anchor that to. So here we have the same idea, the same sort of outline, but we have some specific subjects. So if we're using that block one side at a time approach, that's this one right here. All right, and we can tell the topic sentence is my two cousins are very different, right? So in this block version, this student talks about their cousin Joanne first. She talks about Joanne's appearance, Joanne's personality, and Joanne's hobbies and interests. Then she switches over and starts talking about her other cousin, Mary. And she talks about Mary's appearance, Mary's personality, and Mary's hobbies and interests, right? So this is what I meant when I said that point, here, point 1, point 2, and point 3 match up exactly to point 1, point 2, and point 3 here, right? That everything under subject A is exactly the same as what will be under subject B. This is what I meant by that. So everything that she talks about for her cousin Joanne, she talks about those same exact things for her cousin Mary. So it's not like she's talking about Joanne's appearance, Joanne's personality, and Joanne's hobbies and interests. And then she gets to Mary and she talks about, you know, Mary's taste in music, Mary's job, and how well Mary did in school. That is not contrasting. That is simply informing us about Joanne and informing us about Mary. It's actually not showing how they're different at all or how they're similar, because you're talking about 3 things for Joanne and 3 completely different things for Mary. That's not contrasting. It has to be the same exact ideas, right? So when she talks about Joanne's appearance, personality, and hobbies and interests, when she then switches over to talk about Mary, it's going to be clear that Mary's appearance, she's going to show us how it's different than Joanne's appearance. She's going to show us how Mary's personality is different than Joanne's personality, how Mary's hobbies and interests are different than Joanne's hobbies and interests. So because she is focusing on the same exact 3 ideas in each section, it is a true contrast. This is one reason why the one side at a time or block approach can be difficult for some students, because they get to the second subject and then they don't pay attention and they don't have it planned out well enough. And so what they discuss for subject B is not the same stuff that they discussed for subject A. And then you don't really have a compare or contrast paragraph. You just have a paragraph about 2 things. Okay. Now, taking that same example and looking at how we would do it point by point, right? We still have our topic sentence. My two cousins are very different, except this time, the first thing we're going to talk about is our first difference, their appearance, right? We talk about appearance first. We discuss Joanne's appearance, and then we discuss Mary's appearance. Then we move to personality, our second difference. We talk about Joanne's personality and Mary's personality. And then we move on to their hobbies and interests. We talk about Joanne's hobbies and interests and then Mary's hobbies and interests. Okay. So two very different ways of organizing the compare or contrast paragraph. One thing that you'll notice in both is how the order of things is maintained. So over here in the block method, when we were in the section about Joanne, we talked about appearance first, then personality, and then hobbies and interests. When we got down here to the section on Mary, not only did we discuss those same three ideas, but we discussed them in the same exact order, right? So in this section on Joanne, it's appearance, personality, hobbies, and interests. In this section about Mary, it's appearance, personality, hobbies, and interests. Over here in the point-by-point method, right? Appearance, personality, hobbies, and interests. And notice we talk about Joanne first every time. That is a critical component of coherence for a compare-contrast paragraph. First is making sure that you have used one of these methods of organization, but also making sure that your ideas have been presented in the same pattern all the way through. We're going to take a look at that too as we go through some sample paragraphs here shortly. Okay. All right, so let's take a look, talk a little bit more in detail about that one side at a time or block method. Right? So remember, this is when you discuss everything about subject A first, and then everything about subject B, right? Any ideas that you discuss for subject A, you must also discuss for subject B, and you can't add anything extra to subject B. The main ideas in both sections have to match up exactly. A scratch outline is a great way to help you visualize this organization and to help ensure that you stick to it when you actually write the paragraph. All right, so let's take a look at a few examples. All right, so this example is actually in the book. The rest are not. So we have our two topics here. The United States Congress, two branches, right? So our topic sentence is the United States Congress, the federal government. Hold on. There we go. The United States Congress, the federal government's lawmaking branch, is made up of two different bodies, the Senate and the House of Representatives. All right. So they mentioned the Senate first here in the topic sentence. So that's the subject they're going to discuss first in the paragraph. They're going to look at how many members. They're going to look at how they have been and currently are elected, how long they serve, and sort of who is the leader of this branch, right, or of this body. And then they're going to switch over because they listed House of Representatives second in the topic sentence. So they're going to discuss the House of Representatives second in the paragraph. And look, they are discussing the same four things, right? So up here in the Senate, the first main idea was how many members. Here for the House of Representatives, the first main idea is how many members. The second main idea up here for the Senate was how, when, and how they have been and are currently elected. right? Second main idea down here for the House, how they are elected. Third main idea up here for the Senate, how long they serve. Third main idea down here for the House, how long they serve. Fourth main idea here for the Senate, who the leader is. Fourth main idea for the House, who the leader is. So you can see how the topic sentence sets up this compare contrast. And this is a contrast because we're looking at the differences, right? We know what we're focusing on, the Senate and the House. And we know that the Senate came first in the topic sentence. So the Senate is going to come first in the paragraph. And we know that it's discussing the same four main ideas in both sections. Let's take a look at the actual paragraph to see how this outline translates into a paragraph. All right, so the United States Congress, 2 branches. The United States Congress, the federal government's lawmaking branch, is made up of 2 different bodies, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate consists of 100 members, 2 from each state. Until 1913, senators were elected by state legislatures, but the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, approved in that year, now requires the direct election of senators by each state's citizens. Senators serve 6-year terms, and about 1/3 of the members are eligible for re-election every 2 years. The presiding officer of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States. The House of Representatives has 435 members representing congressional districts across the United States. The boundaries of the congressional district are determined, theoretically at least, by the number of people residing in the district. Therefore, while New Jersey has 12 congressional districts, Wyoming, with a much smaller population, has only 1. Members of the House serve 2-year terms, at the end of which all members must be re-elected if they wish to continue. The presiding officer of this body is the Speaker of the House, who is elected by members of the majority party. Whenever the 2 branches pass different versions of a bill, a committee consisting of both representatives and senators meets to resolve the differences. So yes, we can see that this paragraph stuck to this outline. We have our topic sentence. It talked about the Senate first, these 4 specific ideas, talked about the House of Representatives next, and it discussed the same 4 specific ideas. It was a very well organized paragraph. It's not a perfect paragraph. We could go back and find some things that could be, worked on to make it even better. But right now we're focusing just on whether or not it was organized with the scratch outline and if that translated into how the paragraph itself was organized, right? All right, so let's take a look at a couple other examples. This one right here is actually a student sample. So you will not find this one in the book. This came from a previous student. All right, and so this was, I believe, one of the, a journal topic that you guys did on either comparing or contrasting 2 people you're close to. Right, so student had done the journal and had some great ideas and decided to go ahead and use this as her topic for her compare contrast paragraph. And she, used a scratch outline, which isn't required, but she did it. And it really helped her stay on track writing the paragraph. So her topic sentence says, 2 people I am close to that I feel are complete opposites are my husband and my best friend. So she listed her husband first. So that's who she's going to discuss first. And in that section about her husband, she's going to discuss his personality, his work ethic, his cleanliness and organization, and his ability to get along with others. Then she's going to transition and discuss her best friend. And she's also going to discuss her best friend's personality. And I'm guessing how it's different from her husband's. She's going to discuss her best friend's work ethic. Again, probably how it's different from her husband's. And she's going to discuss her best friend's cleanliness and organization. Again, probably a lot different than her husband. And then her friend's ability to get along with others. And if she has done this correctly, when she's in that section about her best friend, when she talks about her best friend's personality, not only is she going to tell us about her best friend's personality, but she's also going to clarify why it's so different from her husband's. Again, remember, she says they're complete opposites, right? So we know that, whatever she says about both of them in terms of personality, work ethic, cleanliness and organization, and ability to get along with others, no matter what she says about those four things, for each person, they're going to be different somehow. She's going to show us how they're different, right? And it's not just here, this is what my husband's personality is like. This is what my best friend's personality is like. She's not going to just make us draw the conclusion. She's going to say, this is what my husband's personality is like, which you can see is definitely different than my best friend's personality, which is like this, blah, blah, blah. All right, so let's look at the paragraph and see if she achieved that. All right. Yeah, I gotta type it. Over here. All right, two people I love. Two people I am close to that I feel are complete opposites are my husband and my best friend. My husband is easygoing, has great work ethic, likes to have the house clean and organized, and can get along with anyone. He is the type of man that is up for anything. He doesn't usually get upset or mad about anything and can go with the flow. That's his personality. He is very hardworking and a man of all trades. He can do anything he puts his mind to. If you ask him to build a staircase or a big playset, he will figure it out without question. Right? His work ethic. My husband likes to keep the house clean and in order. After the kids go to bed, he is always staying up late to make sure the toys are picked up, the table is cleared off, and the dishes are done. He has great work ethic. He never calls in, works 2 jobs to provide for his family. He doesn't really like my best friend, but tolerates her. He gets along with her because of me. My best friend is not easygoing, does not have a great work ethic, does not clean house very often, and she is not someone that can get along with many. She is very hard-headed and is the type of person that you must be careful of what you say or she can take it the wrong way. She doesn't have a great work ethic at all. She typically calls in quite often. She would rather not work if it was up to her. Her house is usually quite messy, and if it gets cleaned, it's her daughter cleaning the house. If the house gets too messy, she will then start cleaning it herself. She is not easy to get along with if she doesn't know you. She has no filter. She is very blunt and is not afraid to show it. Most of the time, she likes my husband. They both try to tolerate each other because despite their differences, they both care about me. All right, so she did. She stuck to, what she said she was going to talk about. She talks about her husband first, these 4 very specific ideas, and then her best friend, again, those 4 very specific ideas, and showing how her best friend is vastly different from her husband, right? So it's a very successful paragraph. Again, it's not perfect. A few small things that she could have worked on to make it like a 100% score, but this was an A paragraph. She did what she was supposed to do, even if it's not perfect. But it definitely, I think she got like in the low to mid 90s on that paragraph. So she did really well. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. All right, let's take a look at another one here. Oh, this one's interesting because it's not a topic that you were given, that you've done in a journal or a discussion. But it worked really well. So it's about changing careers, right? So she says whether being a medical assistant in the doctor's office or being an instructor in the medical field, they both are very similar in various ways. So she is going to be she's going to be looking at the similarities between being a medical assistant and being an instructor. So it's very interesting, when she talks about, she lists medical assistant first in the topic sentence, right? It comes first here in the topic sentence. So that's what she discusses first in the body of the paragraph. And as a medical assistant, you have to build trust and rapport with patients. You have to educate patients, and you feel gratified when patients are satisfied. And then as an instructor, you have to build trust and rapport with students. You have to educate students, and you feel gratified when students succeed. So she is talking about the same 3 exact ideas in both sections, or at least that's what her outline says she's going to do. And she does. You can see, whether being a medical assistant in the doctor's office or being an instructor in the medical field, they both are very similar in various ways. As a medical assistant, you play a big role in your patients' lives. First of all, the medical assistant must gain the trust of every patient and build a good rapport so the patient will have confidence the medical assistant will guide them on the right track to getting better. Secondly, the medical assistant must educate the patient about their medical conditions, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, or a blood clotting problem. Then the medical assistant must show them how to take their medication properly, work a glucometer, or change their diet and lifestyle. Along with educating the patient, the medical assistant must be able to accurately answer any questions that the patient may have regarding their medical condition. Last but not least is the gratification and humble feeling that the medical assistant feels when he or she is told, "Thank you for helping me get better. You've truly changed my life," from the patient. Interestingly enough, being an instructor in the medical field is actually quite similar to being a medical assistant, because as an instructor, you play a big role in your students' lives. To begin, being an instructor in the medical field requires building a rapport with healthy people who have decided to change their lives for the better. Getting to know them individually and as a group is key to gaining their trust and letting them know that you're beside them every step of the way. The instructor is also responsible for educating their students, such as teaching the language of the medical field, everything about all the body parts and what they do and what happens to them when those parts don't function the way they should. The instructor also helps with teaching students how to manage their time more proficiently to allow for studying. Last but not least, the "I can do anything" look on their faces when they have completed their program is always a moment of gratification for an instructor. Whether working in the doctor's office or in a classroom at a college, both careers are very rewarding because have the same common goal, which is to make each person's life better and help people. All right, so she stuck to the outline. She did exactly what the outline said she was going to do, but I like to use this example because, again, it's an interesting choice of subjects. Looking at 2 jobs that you have, and how, in this case, they might seem really different, but they actually have a lot in common. You could go the other way too. 2 jobs that you think are so much alike. For instance, like I could do this. I could I could look at previous jobs that I've had in the restaurant business, and I could say, like, you would think that being a server at this restaurant would be just like being a server at this restaurant, but so different. And obviously they're going to have some things in common, but it's the differences that stick out. So I just like that it's an interesting take on the paragraph, and 2 very cool topics that she went with that weren't necessarily not common topics that I get. It's starting to become a little more popular now that I've added her sample into the lesson, and that's fine. The more topics that I can sort of show you guys examples of, I think the better it is for you. All right, so those were our examples of the one side at a time approach, right? The block approach. So now we need to switch gears and look at the other method of development, which is point by point, right? So remember, this is the method where you discuss your first similarity or difference and explain how that applies to subject A and how it applies to subject B. And then you move on to your second similarity or difference and explain how that main idea, how that one applies to subject A and subject B. And then you continue the pattern, right? All right. And you have to go in the same order. So like, you need to talk about subject A first every time, right? So this is our first similarity. Talk about subject A, then subject B. Here's our second similarity. Subject A, subject B. Same order all the way through. You don't want to flip-flop, right? Even in one main idea, when you're talking about your first difference, let's say. You don't want to say something about subject A and then subject B, and then go back to subject A and then back to subject B. You don't want to flip-flop within the main idea either. You want to say everything about subject A and then everything about subject B. Move on to the next difference or similarity. Everything about subject A, then everything about subject B. Because if you keep going back and forth, it can get a little confusing. All right, so let's take a look at some scratch outlines and examples of this method. All right, so this one is from the book, right? So I have an example from the book of both methods of development. This one is about good and bad horror movies. And this is one where the underlying purpose of the paragraph tends to be more about making a judgment, which is not something that you guys are going to do. So just keep that in mind, right? But it's still a good example of how to organize the point-by-point approach. So a good horror movie is easily distinguished from a bad one. We're going to talk first about kinds of victims, right? What kinds of victims do good horror movies have? What kinds of victims do bad horror movies have? Then we're going to look at the effect on the audience. What kind of an effect does a good horror movie have? What kind of effect does a bad horror movie have? Then we're going to look at tone. What kind of tone does a good horror movie have? What kind of tone does a bad horror movie have? Looks fairly straightforward, right? Victims, audience, effect on audience, and tone. We just have to make sure that those are indeed the three differences that get focused on in that order, and that we talk about good horror movies first in each section. Let's take a look at the paragraph. A good horror movie is easily distinguishable from a bad one. A good horror movie, first of all, has both male and female victims. Both sexes suffer terrible fates at the hands of monsters and maniacs. Therefore, everyone in the audience has a chance to identify with the victim. Bad horror movies, on the other hand, tend to concentrate on women, especially half-dressed ones. These movies are obviously prejudiced against half the human race. Second, a good horror movie inspires compassion for its characters. For example, the audience will feel sympathy for the victims in the horror classics about Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Jr., and also for the Wolfman himself, who is shown to be a sad victim of fate. In contrast, a bad horror movie encourages feelings of aggression and violence in viewers. For instance, in the Halloween films, the murders are seen from the murderer's point of view. The effect is that the audience stalks the victims along with the killer and feels the same thrill he does. Finally, every good horror movie has a sense of humor. In Alien, as a crew member is coughing and choking just before the horrible things burst out of his chest, a colleague chides him, "The food ain't that bad, man." Humor provides relief from the horror and makes the characters more human. A bad horror movie, though, is humorless and boring. One murder is piled on top of another, and the characters are just cardboard figures. Bad horror movies may provide cheap thrills, but the good ones touch our emotions and live forever. All right, so when they agree or disagree with the conclusions they have drawn, you might not really think that they have fully explored some of these ideas. It's a they make some statements in here. But that's kind of what you got to do sometimes, be bold. But when we're looking at the organization, it's spot on, right? Talked about the victims in good horror movies and then victims in bad horror movies. Talked about the effect on the audience, how good horror movies affect the audience, how bad horror movies do. They followed the pattern set up in the outline exactly. Okay. Let's take a look here. We have a student sample. They used it's the discussion on life then versus life now. So she decided to use that as her topic for the compare contrast paragraph. So we have, there is a lot of growing you do as you become an adult, but there are some things that never change. And there are quite a few things that have stayed the same for me. Oh, okay. Similarities, things that have stayed the same. She's actually looking at how her life then and her life now are actually pretty similar. The first way that they are similar is her shyness, right? So she's going to explain what she was like as a shy kid and what she is like as a shy adult. Another thing that is similar is drawing, how she draws, right? How she uses art. She's going to talk about how she would draw as a kid and how she still draws as an adult. And the last thing that is similar, doesn't seem like much, but it's a big deal to her, is her favorite color. Her favorite color as a kid was black. Favorite color as an adult is still black. And it's, again, it seems like a trivial thing, but it's actually a pretty important element of her childhood and adulthood. Let's see how she translates this into a paragraph, right? There's a lot of growing you do as you become an adult, but there are some things that never change, and there are quite a few things that have stayed the same for me. One of these similarities is my shyness. I was so shy as a kid that if someone talked to me, I would just stand there, not able to get any words to come out of my mouth. I would want to run and hide. I would turn bright red and try to avoid eye contact. And my shyness stuck with me as I grew into adulthood. Now, as an adult, there are things I must do, and being an adult requires a lot of talking. It's still very difficult, and I still want to run away. I still blush when I'm uncomfortable, and I have a nervous habit of simply smiling when I try to maintain eye contact. The next thing that I have in common with my younger self is my love of drawing. As a kid, I would fill up sketchbooks, and when I ran out of room, I would just use lined paper. I used drawing to get out emotions I had a hard time expressing, or to get out feelings I kept to myself since I didn't talk too much. Now, as an adult, I have sketchbooks, canvases, and an iPad that I can fill up to my heart's desire. I've been through quite a lot, and drawing is still a therapeutic feeling for me. For example, I have a hard time with self-love, so I started using myself as a body reference to my drawings as a way to find beauty in myself. Finally, the last thing I have in common with my younger self is my favorite color. It has always been black. As a kid, I had a favorite hoodie. It was all black and had a black and white striped inner hood. I wore it all the time, even in Florida's summer heat. I would sketch with charcoal or a heavy pencil to make my drawings appear very dark. I would even wear heavy eyeliner, and I dyed my hair black. Now, as an adult, most of my clothes are black or at least dark in color. I still love my dark eyeliner and will paint my nails black also. Most of my bedroom furniture is black, and so is my bed set. Yes, I have grown up and changed in many ways, but my younger self and I really have a lot in common. Again, she did a great job of, pulling out 3 distinct similarities that she wanted to focus on and organizing the paragraph around those 3 similarities. And when she talked about the first similarity, she explained what it was like when she was a kid and what it's like now as an adult. She moved on to the second similarity. She talked about what that was like as a kid and now what it's like as an adult. She went on to the third similarity, discussed what it was like as a kid and what it's like now as an adult. She gave a pattern for us to follow, right? First similarity, subject A, subject B. Second similarity, subject A, subject B. Third similarity, subject A, subject B. But she gave an equal amount of support for both subject A and subject B in all three similarities. She didn't just say, you know, for instance, in the section about being shy, that first similarity, she didn't just explain what it was like being a shy kid with all of these examples. You know, she said, I was just so shy as a kid that if someone talked to me, I would just stand there, not able to get any words to come out of my mouth. I would want to run and hide. I would turn bright red and try to avoid eye contact. And my shyness stuck with me as I grew into adulthood. The next thing I have in common with my younger self is my love of drawing. She didn't just stop when she said, and I'm still shy as an adult. She explained what that shyness is like as an adult, and then moved on to the second similarity. She gave an equal amount of support to her shyness as a kid and her shyness as an adult. When she moves on to drawing, she gives an equal amount of support for how drawing was important when she was a kid and how drawing is important as an adult. When she moved on to the third similarity about her favorite color, she gave equal amount of support for how black was her favorite color as a kid and how black is still her favorite color as an adult. It's all equal. That's an important component of this paragraph also, something you want to be mindful of. So our last student sample here, another topic that you guys have had to write on informally, is life before kids versus life as a parent, right? So topic sentence. My life before I had my children was drastically different, especially my freedom, financial responsibility, and priorities. All right, so she's going to go point by point. She's going to talk about freedom first. She actually lists the differences here in the topic sentence. She listed freedom first. That's what she's going to talk about first. She listed financial responsibility second. That's what she's going to talk about second. She listed priorities third. That's what she's going to talk about third, right? So freedom before kids as a parent. Financial responsibility before kids as a parent. Priorities before kids and as a parent. So she has the paragraph organized according to the three differences she's going to focus on. And within each of those differences, she's going to talk about what it was like before kids and then what it is like as a parent. And every single time, before kids comes first. Here's her paragraph. My life before I had my children was drastically different, especially my freedom, financial responsibility, and priorities. Before I had children, I had tons of freedom. I could go anywhere I wanted, whenever I wanted. I didn't have to think ahead or worry about making arrangements for someone to babysit. Now it's a whole ordeal to go out and have fun with my husband or friends. I have to start planning at least a week in advance, sometimes more. I have to find a babysitter and make sure that my plans don't conflict with anything the kids might have going on with sports or school. Another way my life is different is my financial responsibility. Before kids, all of my money was spent on me and the things I wanted to do. If I wanted to go get my nails done and buy a $200 purse, I could. Now I have to have a budget in place to make sure that all of the kids' sports fees, school fees, meals, and general everyday needs are met before I can even consider spending my money on myself. And this brings me to one of my biggest changes I have had to make, my priorities. Before kids, my priorities were lacking. I never really gave my priorities much thought. I was impulsive and did whatever I wanted at any given moment. Now I have to take my family into consideration with every decision I make. I have to ask myself, how will this affect them? My life is no longer about myself only, so I've had to step up and put my family first. In conclusion, my life is very different now, but different isn't always bad. I think in many ways it has made me a better, more considerate person. All right, so looking back at the outline, matches up. This is what she said her plan was, and her paragraph executed on that plan. All right, so as you can see, having a clear pattern of organization is essential to being successful with this paragraph. When you're using the one-sided time method or the block method, be sure to follow the same order of points for each side. So we talk about subject A first, point 1, point 2, point 3. Subject B, point 1, point 2, point 3 better be exactly the same as point 1, point 2, and point 3 up in subject A's section. Match up, right? When you use the point-by-point method, make sure you follow the same order for each side as you discuss each point, right? So first difference, subject A, subject B. Second difference, subject A, subject B. Subject A should always go first. Every main idea, right? So when you've decided on your two subjects that you want to compare or contrast, you really want to start thinking about that method of organization pretty early on. Now, keep in mind though, that it's not set in stone. So you pick your two topics, two subjects, and you start on the outline. It's just an outline. It is not set in stone. If you start working on it and realize, like, let's say you start off with using the one side at a time or block method, and you're filling out that outline, or even if you've already filled out the whole outline and you start writing the paragraph, and you get midway through and you're like, oh, this just is not working. I don't like this. It just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem good. Change it. Go back. Fill out the other outline with the point by point. See if that feels better. It's not set in stone. Even if you submit the paragraph to me using the one side at a time approach and you don't do very well and you're like, okay, I'm going to revise this because I really want to get a better grade. Maybe I should change the method of development. Reach out to me because we can, you know, I might say like, no, the method is pretty good. You just need to focus on doing these things differently. Because I don't want to make it more work for you than it needs to be. But, you know, I also want you to be happy with what you've written. And sometimes that means pivoting, even when you're much further along in the process than you'd like to be when you do a pivot. But it's not set in stone, but you do want to start thinking about your method of organization really early in your process. Now, because it will help keep you on track. Even if you fill out an outline for the one side at a time approach, and then you realize that you want to do the point by point approach instead, you're still going to probably use the same ideas from the one side at a time outline. You're just going to put it all in different places for the point by point outline. So it's not like you are completely starting from scratch just because you've decided you want to switch your method of organization. It's okay, but start thinking about it right in the beginning. So as soon as you've figured out your two subjects that you want to compare or contrast, start thinking about your method of organization. Because the sooner you start thinking about that, the more likely it is that you will end up with a well-organized, coherent paragraph, whether you change midway or not. Okay? All right. So choose your topics. Decide whether you will compare them, talk about their similarities, or contrast them, talk about their differences. Make sure you have a clear purpose in mind. Are you looking at how two things that everybody thinks are different are actually quite similar? Are you looking at two things that everybody assumes are similar, but are actually quite different. Try to have one of those in mind with your two subjects. You don't have to come out and word it that way in your paragraph, but at least if you're thinking of these two questions when you're choosing your subject, and you'll have an underlying purpose, even if you don't explicitly state it like these questions have. You don't have to say, although everyone thinks my twin and I are exactly alike, we're actually much different. You don't have to word it like that. But if you thought about the question, am I looking at two things that seem different but are actually similar? Or am I looking at two things that seem similar but are actually different? Then at least you will have that underlying purpose at the heart of the paragraph, whether it's explicit or not. Then once you have thought about, you've come up with your two subjects, and you've decided whether you're going to focus on similarities or differences, what that underlying purpose is going to be, write your topic sentence. Again, it's a working topic sentence. It can be revised, altered if needed, but go ahead and come up with one right away. Write it down. Don't lose it. Right? Then you want to come up with it, at least 3. I would say 3 is always a magic number with paragraphs and composition pieces. Come up with at least 3 strong main ideas to support your topic sentence. In other words, that means you need to decide on the specific similarities or the specific differences that you will focus on, right? So looking back up here, these: freedom, financial responsibility, priorities. Those were her 3 main ideas. Here, shyness, drawing, favorite color. Kinds of victims, effects on audience, tone. Building trust and rapport, educating, feeling gratified. Those are the main ideas. Come up with those. That's your next step, right? So topic sentence. Then what are the 3 main similarities, or what are the 3 main differences that I'm going to focus on? And then use your topic sentence and those 3 main ideas to create a scratch outline. Start working on the outline. Right? Again, don't fill out the outline right away first. Just start jotting down. You can kind of do it on the outline. It's up to you. Just start jotting down as many ideas as possible for each one, even if you feel like they don't fit, they don't make sense yet. You're not going to necessarily use them all anyway. And you can do this on a scratch piece of paper instead if you want, instead of doing it on the outline. But get as many ideas down as you can, and then look at that list and decide which ones you're actually going to include in the paragraph. At that point, you can maybe then fill out the outline if you've done that on scratch paper, right? All right. And if you haven't already, decide which method of development you want to use. Use a scratch outline to help you. And then make sure that you're going in the right order, that you're providing equal support for both subjects all the way through. Use the outline to your advantage. You have seen now with 6 paragraphs, how the scratch outline helps them construct the paragraph and stay focused and go and have coherence. Right? So use it to your advantage. All right, then you're going to write the first draft of your paragraph, and then you're going to go back through it and check for unity, support, coherence, and sentence skills. How do you do that? For unity, Does my topic sentence make it clear what two things I'm comparing or contrasting? Does my topic sentence make it clear that I will be focusing on the similarities between my two subjects or the differences between my two subjects? If appropriate, does my topic sentence make it clear which specific similarities or which specific differences I will focus on? That doesn't always come naturally to actually list your similarities or differences. So that's why it says if appropriate. And then do all the sentences in the paragraph stay on topic? Support. Have I compared or contrasted the subject in at least 3 important ways? Have I provided specific details that effectively back up my supporting points? Have I provided adequate details, adequate meaning enough, that effectively back up my supporting points? Hint, aim for 3 to 4 sentences of support for both subjects on each main idea. Equal, same amount, 3 to 4 sentences, both subjects for every similarity or every difference. Coherence. If I've chosen the one side at a time format, have I discussed every point about my first subject, then discussed the exact same points in the exact same order about the second subject? If I have chosen the point-by-point format, have I consistently discussed a point about one subject, then immediately discussed the same point about the other subject before moving on to the next point? Have I used appropriate transitions such as first, in addition, also, and another way to help readers follow my train of thought? Remember, we still need coherence within the whole paragraph too, to connect one idea to the next, one thought to the next, right? Sentence skills, this is your proofreading, right? Go back to week 3 if you need some reminders there. And then here are some of my final thoughts on this. As always, your paragraph success depends on how well you achieve the 4 bases of writing: unity, support, coherence, and sentence skills. So the base that students struggle with the most in this paragraph is coherence. Make sure you understand the one side at a time requirements if that is the method you're going to use. Make sure you understand the point-by-point requirements if that is the method you're going to use. And you must use one or the other. So study the method you want to use so that you can execute your paragraph correctly to achieve coherence. The base students struggle with next is support. Make sure you provide equal support for both sides of your topic in each main idea. And for every similarity or difference you discuss, in 3 to 4 sentences of support for subject A and 3 to 4 sentences of support for subject B. And then reach out if you have questions. And I mean,